Our next panel, or next session, is an important one. It's called Into the Dark, ? Digital Future versus Enlightenment. And I have the pleasure to introduce you to the questions of, let me read it. With the availability of abundant knowledge to everyone in the world, the internet age has often been called the new age of enlightenment. But the other side of the coin seems to be that we are increasingly dependent on the advice of machines. How does that shape our thinking? Are we losing our intellectual independence? Are we going back to the dark ages? I look forward to the transatlantic views on these questions with Rudolf Schüßler, professor of philosophy at the university, guess which university? Of course, the University of Bayreuth, and tech history heavyweight and longtime friend, editor-in-chief of Backchannel. Who of you is subscribed to Backchannel? Only two. I really suggest subscribe it. It's an important source of information and news. Stephen Levy, come on stage.
And by the way, that subscription is actually just following us. We're all free, backchannel.com. Yes. Well, thanks a lot, and thank you, Professor, for coming all the way from Germany to enlighten us here. So we're going to drop kind of an erudition bomb on you all. When we were setting up the session, I agreed to talk to Professor Schüßler here. He sent me some background on this, and he sent me a paper I looked at, and it dealt in the different philosophical strains in Spanish scholasticism in the 16th and 17th century. And I thought, well, this is going to be an interesting session there. Then I sent him another email to say, well, how does this relate to where we are now? And he actually gave a fantastic answer, which made me feel that the comparison to what happened several centuries ago is actually kind of brilliant to frame some of the most important issues we're grappling with now here. So first of all, let me tee us up for this there. Tell us what we can look at from what happened in the 16th and 17th century on how they grapple with issues like what is truth, and then we'll talk about how those things actually, those battles are still being waged, and actually in a very serious way in our age today.
Okay, so thank you for this nice introduction. Indeed, it looks a bit arcane to come from Spanish scholasticism, 16th century, and talk about the internet, but what happened at that time? Spanish scholasticism, that is the intellectual background of the Spanish Inquisition. And what did the Spanish Inquisition do? It controlled opinion. And if you were searching for opinion in the 16th century, and if you want to use opinions, and if you want to weed out fake news, you had to do it through an institution, and this was probably the most powerful institution at the time and the most data collecting institution of the time, the Inquisition. So the interesting thing...
We generally don't get good fuzzy feelings about the Spanish Inquisition.
So the problems of how to keep a certain diversity of opinion while controlling it was already there, and then later came the Enlightenment. That's the title of the talk now and our discussion. And the Enlightenment did away with all these restrictions, with the attempt to control opinions, and that's why the internet was called the New Enlightenment, because it was egalitarian. Everybody seemed to have access to all information we could have on this planet, and everybody could dare to think for herself or himself. This is the old motto of the Enlightenment, dare to think for yourself. And it seemed to be possible with the Enlightenment. And at the same time, an old promise made by Benjamin Franklin, one of the great philosophers of the Enlightenment and one of the founding fathers of the US, seemed to come true, that in free competition, truth will always prevail over lies and error. So this is something that the Enlightenment promised and which the American founding fathers promised to their people. Truth was always in free competition prevail over error. And probably that's no longer true in the age of the Internet.
Well, so I actually was around in some of the initial exuberance of the internet when it started exploding there. And we had our own, Declaration of Cyberspace Independence, whatever it was that John Perry Barlow wrote there. And, as you say, there was this idea, this diversity of expression and opinion would come about. And now you kind of wonder whether we were severely misguided there, because what's happened recently makes us question whether there is this such thing as this consensus acceptance of reality there and truth. So if you, again, flash back to the Inquisition, there was a kind of consensus truth, but it was imposed top down, right, by an institution which was, and the version of truth implied a buy-in of a lot of articles of faith, right, which, some people might say are really not provable truth, not from a scientific sense there. And so now you kind of wonder whether the arrow of progress, so to speak, of the internet, led us to the point we are now, where truth is fuzzier, it's truthiness, because, the internet itself might have fueled the idea that there is no truth, that anything someone says on the internet and a lot of people subscribe to, and this actually is almost like a principle of the current administration, that's okay too, that we do have alternate truths.
Yeah, I think the point I want to make is that that's not a new phenomenon. So truth wasn't well defined formally and is ill defined now. It's not that truth was less fuzzy in the 16th century, but if you look at it in detail, and have done that in Rome in the archives for a couple of years, you see that they had a huge problem with delimiting truth, with making distinctions between alternative truth and real truth. And the problems they found are more or less the same problems that come up now through the internet, because there is simply no theory for selecting truth from error, or distinguishing truth from error.
Well, there is the scientific method, right? I mean, certainly, you could test things by empirical evidence, and that's kind of a way to find truth, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's what happens now in many of these movements who say we want facts, not opinions. But if you look at what science, especially the social sciences, have done all the time, is that they just produced probable opinions. That they produced probable opinions, highly justified opinions, but not facts. So facts is produced by mathematics, by parts of physics, but even in other parts of physics, it's just well-justified opinion. So the problems we have is how to distinguish different kinds of opinions. And science will not help us. In economics, and many of our discussions are about economic issues, you don't have the kinds of facts you have in physics. It's a matter of opinion what's the best economic policy. So you have to deal with these justifications of opinions. And I doubt whether we can do that in a manner that is reasonable, structured, and compatible with the freedom of the internet.
What is the impact of these very powerful institutions on the internet, like Facebook and Google, have on these subjects there?
I think that Google is in a position that is very different from like newspapers who try to weed out irrational opinions and try to select for quality opinions. Google is a monopolist in a certain sense. And for this reason, whatever Google does will frame the way we are thinking and will narrow down through the algorithms they use what human beings can use. Human beings are usually characterized by following very, very different approaches. Different human people follow very different approaches to selecting their opinions. And now via Google, they will probably be narrowed down in their autonomy of choosing between different ways to look at things, and will have to follow the selection mechanism that Google is offering them.
Well, it's kind of interesting. So from following Google and its history, the original idea of the search algorithm was almost a populist impulse there. They were going to poll the net and kind of look at the net and see what the world by like the links considered the answer to your question there, right? So what was high on the search ranking was what the world thought. So increasingly, it's the other way around. Google tries to answer the question there. So it's not really what people think is what Google's delivering you, but what it determines through various algorithms and databases there, knowledge bases, which is a big part of the search results there, like to be the answer there. So by doing that, Google in a way has to own some of the fake news problem, because the early Google would just say, that's what the web thinks, that's fine, but now Google and of course Facebook as well, we could talk about that, more owns really what's the truth and stands in there as an authority.
Yeah, I think when I look at Google and use it, then I don't have the choice to structure the search processes according to the principles I have learned in philosophy and epistemology. So I would, somebody who knows about different search strategies would like to be autonomous in just at least doing some decisions or using some of the knowledge.
I think you've got a rescue kit coming here.
Okay.
We have an electronic form of truth.
The point is that.
There it is.
Okay. Okay. The point is that you would like to be able to make some of the decisions yourself, but Google doesn't offer that. Google is like a scientific approach that believes there's only one approach that should be offered to the people. And it's okay if you don't want to have all that diversity, just use the default option. But for people who like to have this option in the search, I think it's very important for keeping up this stream of enlightenment, further developing human thought, to interact with the machine and to determine parts of the search process for yourself.
Well, Facebook would like to say that they give you the choice there. By your behavior, it selects the things you say, and you can create your own, I don't think Facebook would say it in this way, but you could say you create your own truth bubble by your actions, and what winds up in your news feed turns out to reflect back on yourself what you want to hear there. So, do you like that?
I won't like that either, of course, because I think it's unavoidable that you form a bubble around you, but from time to time you like to leave the bubble and travel to other bubbles. And this is exactly something that should be stimulated by, intellectually stimulated by a search engine or by Facebook, and it isn't. It just leaves you where you are, and most people are happy with that. But the problem is that these people are not stimulated to develop, and this is the problem.
So we don't have a lot of time there. I was going to ask you a lot about how AI affected this, but actually let me skip to something else, because I have a scholar here who's looked at the Dark Ages and the Enlightenment, and actually my big question is, we all feel that we've been living in this hyper-enlightened age, but now there's a lot of things happening in the world. We're talking about the darkness here that could happen. As someone, a philosopher who studies the swings of history, are we headed to a dark age now? Are things that are happening in the world, everything from Brexit to our election and other stuff around the world leading, despite the internet, or maybe the internet's accelerating it, to a new dark age?
I'm not saying that, and I don't know.
I'm not saying
no,
I'm asking you.
I simply don't know where we are heading. I just want to say we have to take care to take certain steps in order not
moving in a direction we want to move into.
Are you optimistic? You think the internet makes it worse?
I don't think so. That it's increasing the risk, and so it increases the attention we should pay to these issues and the care we should take.
Okay, well, unfortunately we're out of time, but I think we've solved a lot of the world's problems here. Thanks very much.